Hey everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between two writers, not between two ferns, between two writers. It's a show where I just get to have a fun and fantastic and engaging and insightful conversation with a multitude of different writers, and I do always learn something. I finish the conversation, I'm like, that was great, and it was really interesting what they said about this, because this is something I've considered doing, or whatever it is. It's always it always kind of like fills me with adrenaline, like after we have this conversation. So and you know, sometimes I know the person, sometimes I don't really know the person. Sometimes I know them a little bit, kind of in awe of them, and I can't wait to find out more. And that was exactly the situation I found myself in today, because today I got to talk to USA Today best-selling and award-winning author Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hank is fantastic. I've certainly known of her in the past, and we've had some interactions through some of her own shows as well. But just to get her bio out of the way, so she's the USA Today bestselling author of 14 psychological thrillers, and she's won the most prestigious awards in the genre: 5 Agathas, 5 Anthonys, and the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. In addition to all of this writing that she is doing, she is also an on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV with 37 Emmys and dozens of journalism honors. So she always has been, and she continues to be a very busy person. But that busyness equates to passion, right? Because she's passionate about all of these things. She has this fire in her, and you'll hear from our conversation, even going back to an early age, of wanting to do all these different things and then learning from the things that don't work out. So she's had a really storied career and continues to have a storied career. And it was great to be able to sit down with her and again, just kind of hear about her path and her journey and where she gets inspiration from. So we talked about a lot of cool, geeky writing things. And again, I left the conversation just feeling energized about my own career. So, somebody's engaging when they do that to you. So I think you're going to love this one. This is my conversation with Hank Phillippi Ryan. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And I appreciate your punctuality.
Years of television, right? Years of television.
Is that what it is? It's like because I'm the same way. I am, if I'm not early, then I'm, I consider it late. So I'm always on time or ahead of time.
I try to be, on television, you can't be 1 second late.
Yeah, that's true.
Have to be ready at every minute, crossing fingers. So and also if you're early, you're less frazzled.
Right.
I always get to the airport way too early. It's really ridiculous.
Have you learned I'm sure you have, but over all of your years of television, do you do like little meditation breathing things like right before, or have you learned how to still your mind at will?
My mind has never been still. It's terrible. I've been on television for 43 years and I'm terrified every moment. Is that a good thing? Because that makes you sure you're focused, that terror? I don't know. I try to tell myself that it's a good thing. I try to tell myself to use my fear or my hyper perfectionism, if that's a word, as excitement and edge, but it's mostly just fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
It obviously hasn't hurt me. Although there have been times when I think, if you were just more relaxed, wouldn't this be more fun? And I'm like,
right.
I saw an article in the New York Times, a headline, a tease in the New York Times that said, here's an article for you, is how to know if your brain is overworked. And I looked at that and I thought, I don't have time to read this.
That's step one. Yep. Totally. Well, I'm so eager to talk to you because I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm particularly interested in kind of the angle of dual careers, and, passion for things, and, all of that kind of stuff. But I want to kind of just step back for the listeners, and so they can get to know kind of your journey. So where did you grow up exactly?
Oh, golly. I was born in Chicago. My father was the music critic for the old Chicago Daily News, and my
Oh,
mother was
wow.
and my mother was an art student. He was a music student and she was an art student. And it was all very bohemian with a lot of books and a lot of music and a lot of art when I was a little girl. But then my mom and I moved to Indianapolis after my parents got divorced. And I lived with my mom and stepfather in really rural Indiana. I mean, from urban Chicago to really rural Indiana.
And you were an only child?
Well, then my sister came and then two more sisters and another brother. So there were 5 of us and a lot of animals. My sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library.
As one does.
If you can, it's interesting. Karen Slaughter always laughs at me and says, "Did you live on a little house on the prairie?" and no, it was mostly, it's interesting because it sounds kind of adorable, but it was mostly lonely.
Yeah.
Very solitary, and really my only friends were characters in books, and I would hide up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house and read. Wow. So it was kind of formative, and I look back on it now and with fondness, and it was certainly lovely and helpful, and look where I am now as a result of that.
Right.
But back then it seemed very lonely to me.
So what age was that when you moved to the countryside?
6 or 7.
Okay. Yeah. So absolutely formative years, right? And particularly coming off of kind of being a little kid in an urban landscape, trying to, adjust, and that can be lonely. And that loneliness is such a thread amongst writers, at least that I've talked to and interviewed. There is that. It's like books were my friend because we moved all the time, or we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and so it seems like that was definitely the case for you. Did you find yourself at a very early age I just can't get enough reading, or were you a little bit more moderated?
No, I was such a loner. I was such a bookish, nerdy little unpopular girl with no friends, no fun, no anything. I was voted in junior high, called it junior high, and not most popular and not most likely to succeed or any of those things. I was voted most individual. And
what a cool award, though.
No. Well, now it's cool. Oh, most individual. But when you're 14,
oh, true.
and you're saying, "Oh, please, just let me be like everyone else."
Yeah.
And they were literally saying, "You're weird."
Right.
They put my picture in the school paper upside down to show.
Oh boy.
I have it.
Oh wow. Now, was there a male equivalent, or was it just you as most individual? Because usually those awards are like.
No, you're right. You're totally right. Absolutely, there was a male equivalent, and he was the smart one. So I look back on that now, and I don't have any idea what happened to him. It was just so long ago, and now, of course, I embrace that. I see that as again, a formative thing. I could either have collapsed under it or sort of wrapped my arms around it and said, yeah, I'm an individual. I'm going to do what I want to do. And this is just junior high and I don't care. Now, I don't know if I believed that because I remember crying about it.
Sure. That's such a tough age, even if you are kind of just like hidden behind the scenes, but to be pointed out as individual is, I can see that being a little bit stressful, but again, formative for you. And then you went on to high school, and what did you end up, did you have a sense of like, this is what I want to study when I go to higher education?
Oh, golly, if only there were like a plan. When I went to college, I majored in Shakespeare, which was mostly hiding in my room and reading and listening to records.
Right, because you wanted to chase the money. You were I'm going to major in Shakespeare.
My parents were so upset. They're like, "Oh, honey, you are going to be unemployable. What are you going to learn from this?" I mean, they were lovely and very supportive, but I could just see in their faces, they thought, you're smart and you're good and you're really making a bad choice.
Well, it sounds like a path to teach, essentially.
Well, I wanted to be a rock star. I really wanted to be Linda Ronstadt. That was my goal. And then I wanted to be a disc jockey. I thought my life would be as playing music on the radio. I thought that would be a great thing to do. And then I wanted to be the lawyer for the mine workers for a while. I thought it was really, and I think that being voted most individual made me, my mother said to me when she comforted me about that, she said, you're griping because you say the world isn't fair. And she says, I want to tell you, kiddo, the world isn't fair. And you're just going to have to get used to it.
Right.
And I remember thinking then, no, I'm not. No, I don't have to get used to it. I'm going to make a difference in the world. And so again, that thing that seemed so awful was a thing that changed my life. And so I went into politics after.
Oh, I mean, because really the world is what you make of it. Essentially, it's all about your lens and how you kind of navigate it. So you. What was that? Just you had a passion for politics. You had a passion for making change. And how did that manifest itself? Like what kind of politics?
Making change. It was making change. Yeah. And I think you're right on the money about this, because I was so hurt as a teenager that I thought I'm gonna prevent other people from being this hurt. I'm going to stand up for the little guy and make sure the world is more fair. And that was my whole goal. So I went into politics as sort of an advanced person, press release writer, kind of in political campaigns in Indiana. But no candidate I ever worked for actually won.
Yeah.
That's when you think, maybe you picked the wrong career.
Well, that doesn't mean it was because you weren't doing your job. It was just.
That's true. That's true.
And was it disillusioning? I mean, because I can't even imagine like having that mindset now and going into politics today. Like it just seems like it would be 100% immediately disillusioning.
And it was literally 50 years ago. So imagine how the world has.
Yeah. So there was maybe a little bit more hope going down that path.
Oh no, we thought we would change the world, that our generation was the one that was going to make a difference, and everything would be fine after we took over, or at least got our people in power. It's just it's such a rhythm, it's such a cycle. You just do what you can at the time, try to do the best you can, try to be the best person you can, try to leave a mark in the world in the best way that you can. That's all we can really hope for.
For sure. So I mean, it sounds to me, a lot of people when they're very young struggle with having no idea what they want to do. And you're a little bit more of a Renaissance person where you're like, I have too many things that I want to do. How do I follow it? What was that path post politics?
Well, it was so great because you just never know what's going to happen. I mean, it's just my husband and I don't celebrate the anniversary of the day we met. We celebrate the anniversary of the day before we met. And we call that. I
love that.
Because you never know. We call it You Never Know Day, because you never know what wonderful thing is about to happen. So because of my crushing failure, as I looked at it in politics, I decided how I would change the world by being a reporter. Mm-hmm. And that's when I applied for my first job as a radio reporter. And that was 1970. And I only got that job because I was a woman. The news director was just so baffled when I walked in and asked me about I walked in to apply for this reporter job in Indianapolis on the radio. And the news director says, great, we do need a reporter. Where was your last reporting job? Radio? No. Television? No. Newspaper? No. Magazine? No. He looked at me like, have you ever been a reporter? Have you ever done that? And I said, no. And he finally said, you're so unqualified for this job. You are supremely unqualified for this job. I cannot hire you. He said, you seem like a perfectly nice young woman, and I could probably teach you how to be a reporter, but I don't have time. He said, can you give me one good reason why I should hire you? And I said, well, yes, I can. I said, your license is up for renewal right now at the Federal Communications Commission, and you don't have any women working here. And then I just smiled. And that's how I got my first job in broadcasting.
Wow. And you obviously succeeded, hopefully at that job where it wasn't like a week later they get the license renewed and he fires you.
No. It was great. I loved it. I took a chance that day. I mean, how wacky and how naive and how super confident.
You have nothing to lose.
Right, exactly. So then I worked there for a while. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. and worked on Capitol Hill in the Administrative Practice and Procedure Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee for about a year and a half. And that was a fantastic experience. And then I worked for Rolling Stone magazine, working with Hunter S. Thompson and Jan Wenner for about a year and a half.
Wow.
And that was a wonderful experience.
I can imagine. What were you doing for Rolling Stone?
I wrote a column called Capital Chatter, which was sort of the inside, behind the scenes scoop on what was happening in Washington, D.C. I was based in Washington, D.C. So I covered the Watergate hearings sort of behind the scenes and the CIA hearings sort of behind the scenes. And then I organized the coverage of the 1976 presidential campaign for Hunter Thompson. So he and I traveled around the country doing his.
That's a whole other episode we could do just on. Okay. On your experiences during that.
Right. You were right.
I'm sure it was amazing.
And then when Rolling Stone closed its Washington bureau and I was out of a job, I had two job offers. One was to be the gossip columnist for the Washington Post. I mean, I was 26, to be the gossip columnist for the Washington Post, kind of chic and kind of glamorous. Sally Quinn and Ben Bradley took me to lunch and offered me this job. And I just, I didn't know if I wanted to spend the rest of my life working at that level, being interested in that kind of had to be shallow kind of thing. I mean, being a gossip columnist, I don't know, it was cool at the time in 1970, whatever it was, 5. But so I went home to Indianapolis to try to decide what to do. And I saw that there was a job opening for a television reporter in Indianapolis at the ABC affiliate. So I just went in and said, I'm here to apply for the job as a reporter. And the news director said, okay, hold on a second. And he brought in a photographer with a film camera and handed me a microphone and said, okay, talk.
Screen test. Yeah.
And I didn't even think about it. I said, talk about what? And he's like, whatever you want. So I just talked about Washington, D.C., and got the job as a reporter. And I've been a television reporter ever since then.
Wow. And then, it sounds like along that journey, you are learning indirectly a lot about storytelling, right? Particularly as a columnist, and learning how to be pithy and to the point and, structure it so people are interested. What was then the journey to wanting to actually write fiction?
You're so right about that. Being a reporter was the best, and also working in Capitol Hill was the best education that there could ever possibly be for writing fiction, for learning how to tell a story. I mean, what you need in radio and television is a character who you care about, and an important problem that needs to be solved. You're following leads, you're tracking down clues. You want the good guys to win and the bad guys to get what's coming to them. And in the end, you want some justice and you want to change the world a little bit. And that's exactly the same as writing fiction. And you also need to be, as you said, entertaining and unique and original and have a voice. You need to have a pace. You need to move the story along. I mean, forward motion is exactly what you think about in television. I mean, in TV, I might shoot 20 hours of video to get a minute.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
You're distilling, just like in editing in a novel, you're taking just the very gems that you have and then weaving them all together to make this powerful, propulsive story. So, I don't want you to turn the channel when my stories are on TV.
Right.
And I don't want you to, I always say, I want you to miss your stop on the subway when you're reading the books. And it's that same storytelling pace. So yes, I did learn that as a reporter.
But where was the inspiration? Because I'm very fascinated with, and I'm sure you've had this experience, hundreds of times over when people find out that you write fiction, write books, and you've been published and very successful. And they're like, I've always wanted to write a book. How many people say? Everybody says that. And there's a lot of people who are very serious about it and they never do. And so there has to be that particular cauldron where something in somebody finally says, okay, I'm sitting down and I'm starting to do that. And most people don't. So how is it for you that you're like, I'm going to do this?
You're so right. It's so exactly right. I remember the moment exactly. I was at Channel 7, and golly, this was 17 years ago. It's gotta be. I was at Channel 7 and I was opening my email, and it was back before spam filters were as good as they are now. So remember, we used to get a lot of spam. And every morning at Channel 7, I used to go into my email and clear out the spam and then read my email. So I would make my email be readable and then go through. So one day by mistake, I opened a spam. And the subject line of the spam was a new refinancing deal for you. But when I opened it, and again, by mistake, when I opened it, it had what looked like lines from a Shakespearean era play. Now, see, I knew it wasn't Shakespeare. See, all those college years just weren't.
Right. Everything's coming to this one inflection point in your life.
Yeah. So I knew it wasn't Shakespeare, but I thought, why would someone send a spam email that you didn't know who was going to open, clearly spam, with the subject line, a new refinancing deal for you, but lines from a play in the body of the email? And my brain said to me, and I know as a writer, you'll understand this, my brain said to me, maybe it's a secret message.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, secret messages in computer spam? Are you kidding me? That's the best idea I've ever heard. Could you do that? Why would you do that? How would you do that? What would be the point? Who would get killed? Because, of course, I love suspense. And who would be the intrepid person who figured out why this was going on? And I went home that night. My husband picked me up at work, and I said, sweetheart, I've got a great idea for a novel. I'm going to write a thriller. And Jonathan says, great, honey. He says, do you know how to write a book? And I'm like, how hard can it be? I've read a million books. And that day, Carter, I started writing the book, and you could not keep me from it. It was every night, every weekend, every vacation day. My fun level in the rest of the world stopped. My husband ate so much carry-out salmon from Whole Foods because every single moment of my life was taken up with writing this book. I had no idea how to do it, none.
Right.
But I just had this great idea, and I knew it would work. And that turned out to be Prime Time, my very first novel, which won the Agatha for Best First Novel. And that was the beginning of my career in crime fiction. I just sent in book 15. So
that's fantastic. I mean, we have kind of a similar story, because I started writing literally on one day out of the blue, having this thunderbolt moment and zero idea of what I was doing. And that was the easiest book I ever wrote, because it was terrible and I didn't know what I was doing. And that one never sold. But I did get an agent with that book, same agent I'm with today, 20 years later. But my first 3 books didn't sell. But I'm just like, I just realized, like, this is what I want to do. Like, at least I want this to be a part of my life forever. However big a part, I don't know. And then, for me, 9 books later. Talk
about the thunderbolt moment, though. I always think about that, because you can't make a thunderbolt moment happen. And yet, as a writer, you always need another new idea. I mean, that's the thing that haunts me throughout, is, will I ever have another good idea?
Yeah, that's what it does haunt you, doesn't it? I don't ever think about the other, because I only do one book at a time. So I'm always, this is the book. And then when I'm done, just something happens, and I'll read something, or just somebody will mention something to me. I'm like, oh, but for me, that thunderbolt moment was weird, because, and I am convinced that if you're a creative, if you are a writer, whether you're writing or not, it's going to eventually come out of you one way or another. So what we might say is serendipitous is just, I think, more destiny. And I was taking a class that I had to take for this appraisal license, and I was bored out of my mind. It was an 8-hour class. So I gave myself a murder mystery riddle that I just made up on the spot. I'm like, I'm going to spend the last 2 hours of this class figuring out the answer to this riddle that I just made up. And I couldn't figure out the answer. So I'm like, what is the backstory that explains this murder mystery riddle? And so I went home and I just started writing. And it was like 90 days. I had a 400-page manuscript. And I didn't tell anybody I was writing. I was so embarrassed by it. Not even my wife at the time. But then at the end of it, I'm like, I know this book is terrible, but this is meaningful, right? This is meaningful that I did this. And so maybe I should be curious about this and pay attention to it. And it sounds like similar for you. It's like you had this great idea, but a lot of people have great ideas. You wrote the book. Almost nobody does that. So right. That's something to pay attention to, don't you think?
I do. I think that the universe, and I don't mean to be woo-woo about this, but I think the universe provides, at the time that it's necessary, the universe provides this idea to us. And if we want it, we can take it and it will work. And I have sort of this faith in the writing something, the writing universe, that when it's time for the idea to come, it will present itself. Now, there are days, even though I have this super faith in the process, I have days where I think, anytime now, I'm ready for this. I've got a deadline coming up, so I'm ready for it. And it always does get pretty much down to the wire, but knock on wood, it comes when the time is right for it,
Yeah, and there's something to be said about confidence, which is usually very scarce in writers. I think most writers are a very self-conscious, non-confident bunch, but you do something enough and you can't explain how you've done it, but you're like, I've done it, so I'll be able to do it again. And I don't know how. And it's like, even like sometimes you get the editorial letter, right? And you have all these tremendous suggestions and you're like, in the moment, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'll figure it out. Because you've done it enough times in the past. And so with you just started writing book number 2, book number 3, and that became, how big a part of your life did that become, balancing with your other career?
Well, that was interesting because when book one sold, it was a 2-book deal. So then I had to write the next book. I had to. And that was a different kind of feeling, because now it wasn't just, I'm going to see if this works. Now the question was, you need to have this book to us by November 1st, whatever year it was. Mm-hmm. And so I had a deadline. And so I had to become very disciplined about it. And then before book 2 even was published, I had a contract for book 3 and 4. So,
oh, wow.
In book 3, I thought, I'm a writer. This is my job now. I have to write a book every year. And it was very interesting to me to learn how to organize that. When I was working at Channel 7, on the time I was at the station, I was totally at the station. But what changed was when I came home, and for the 30 years before that, as a reporter, I had still been thinking about my television job. I thought about my television work all the time, 24 hours a day. But I learned to turn off television in my brain and turn on writing in my brain. I still worked. I want to say 5 or 6, 7 years when I was really working all the time. There were no dinner parties and no vacations and no movies. And we finally went on vacation and I was writing on vacation. And
right.
It wasn't a chore. I love it so much that it was so much fun to be sitting out in the sun somewhere where everybody else was at the beach. And I'm just writing away thinking I love this. I love this. I love this. So I learned to become very disciplined about it, very focused about it. I learned to set a timer for 34 minutes. And I'd set my timer and promise myself for that 34 minutes, I would not read email. I would not go on Facebook. I would not go get a Diet Coke. I would not get the mail. I would not do the laundry. I would not, anything. I just focused. And I sort of learned that focus is the key. That if you can just block out everything else and work on your book, I can get a lot done when I focus. And every time I did that, every time it hit the 34 minutes, I was surprised that the time had gone by, and I would just hit, restart and do it again. So I think focusing is the talent, the skill, the desire to really focus on what you're doing and not try to multitask.
And it's a muscle, right? Like you still, even with all the desire to do that, being there, you still have to build that over time, because the first few times, you're totally right. Because I only write an hour a day, and when I write, I am like, I might spend the first 3 minutes warming up by just kind of looking around or whatever. But then once you start going, you're just in it, and then I'm out of it completely. So I don't think about it the rest of the day or anything. But but I love that because you get to escape into this totally different world for an hour, and I look forward to it all day because I'm like, that's going to be fun.
And doesn't the time go by so quickly? You don't.
It's crazy. Yeah. And I might say, like, generally speaking, if I'm actually just writing like a first draft, then let's try to do 500 words a day. And I might look up and I'm like, oh, I have 1,000 words in 40 minutes. And I had no idea because but when you first start, it's not like that because you haven't built the muscle. And it's just like every sentence is like a battlefield.
I know. No.
Right.
And the other thing that works, I think, is that I allow myself to be really bad sometimes.
Totally.
I think I'm going to do my 1,000 words. I'm going to do my 1,000 words a day. I'm going to do this. And sometimes I think, whoa, that was a really bad sentence. That was terrible. There's never been a sentence as terrible as that. And I think, yeah, it's bad. Now just go ahead and write another bad sentence because I can fix it later. Right. So I don't worry about that it's bad along the way.
Right.
Because again, I have confidence that I can come back and make it be the way it's supposed to be. I'm just searching. Like, again, it's like you were saying, as a reporter, I'm out in search of the story.
Right.
So writing that first draft for me is like, I'm just searching for the story. And then I find it in the end, then I go back and make it what it was supposed to be.
Totally. And I'll even, because I don't outline, I'll even, be halfway through it. I kind of don't even remember what happens in a lot of the story because you're just kind of on the tail of the last 20 or 30 pages or so. And I'm just going to let my subconsciousness do its job. And like you said, I will go back and there's going to have to be a lot of editing, but that's cool because getting it done is the hard thing. And, like you said, you get your 1,000 words done and sometimes it's terrible. And it's like data entry and you're not enjoying it, but too bad. You have to do it. That's how you get shit done. Right.
And when later, when you look at it, the days that you were having a bad writing day that you were thinking, no, the delete, she,
right.
You can't tell, the next day you look at it and think, oh, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I mean, it's still not great, but I can see why I did that. And that's fine. And so it's rarely sometimes it is as bad.
Right.
It's rarely as bad as you think it is. And it is always fixable. Even if the fix is cutting it, because sometimes you're just sort of transitioning and really what you just need to do is take that out and see. And when you take it out, you reveal the book you meant to write. What's left is the book that you meant to write. So I think the delete is so valuable. I love to cut. My books are like,
totally.
My books are yours. Mine are like 125,000 words long. And I think, great, I get to cut 25,000 words. I can't wait to do it, to see what I meant to write.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, because your book, if you're writing suspense, thriller, mystery, whatever, it's going to be right around that 85, 90,000 mark, ultimately, when it's published. And for some reason, my first draft is almost within 300 words of 85,000 words. And I don't know how, but in my editing, I will delete 20 and add 20 because again, I'm not outlining. So like there's a lot of cohesion that needs to take place. But I don't ever write 120,000 words. I think that would be that would be difficult. But I agree with you. I have a tattoo that says "Kill Your Darlings" because I am such a firm believer in like, let's look at every sentence. And you use the word distill, and that's exactly right. How do we distill these 20 words in this one sentence to 7 words that are all so much more powerful and evocative? And I don't even like to describe things. So I'm like, I want to have the reader figure this out on their own and give them as few words as possible so that they can kind of create this journey in their head. I don't know how you feel about that kind of writing.
Well, I love your tattoo because I don't think that they're my darlings if they're clogging up my pace and
True.
action and forward motion. They're not my darling. So I don't, when I have to cut something, I'm like, yeah, you're gone. You're not my darling at all. Your demise means my book lives. And so it's fun for me.
And there's a difference between, speaking of editing, going through and structurally changing sentences, not changing the plot, but you're changing the sentences to make it better. as opposed to like this entire 3,000 word scene isn't quite propelling the story forward. That's a tougher cut because you're like, can I? And I always think about this, like you can't be lazy and be a writer because it's so easy to be like, yeah, it's good enough. And maybe it does serve the story. And you have to be honest with yourself. And that's a really hard thing to do in other aspects of life, right? With your day job, or maybe not with TV reporting, but a lot of day jobs, you're just like, that's good enough. You can't do that with your story. And it's exhausting.
And you don't want to, because this is all we have control over in the world, is that our book in book world, is that our book is the best it can possibly be. So if we have a moment of like, oh, it's fine. Oh, that is not fine. I mean, I don't want fine. I mean, I want fabulous. I want the best it could possibly be. I want to give 100% of my skill at the time for every book that I write. So my first book, you can tell it's my first book, but I gave it everything I had.
Right.
And now I just sent in my 15th book. I gave it everything I have, which is different stuff.
Yeah.
After 15 years.
Totally. Your judgment changes because you might give it everything you have, but that doesn't mean if it's actually good or not, because all of us lose context over time with every single book, and so you give it 100% and they're like, this is fabulous, and then your editor's like, nope, we got to change all these different things. You're like, okay, that's great, thank you for that enlightenment, because I have lost context on this book.
Exactly.
But yeah, over time you get better. Sometimes I'll be writing something, I'm like, oh, my editor, I can already hear my editor.
Yeah.
I can already hear her.
I wrote in one of my books, The Murder List, I sent in my first draft, and my editor, who I absolutely revere, took one of my chapters and said, this is the best jury deliberation scene I have ever read in my entire life. And it all has to go.
No.
And I know she was right. But if you look at it, so from a high level, it's like a bunch of guys sitting around talking for an entire chapter. I mean, I call that BOGSAT, BOGSAT, bunch of guys sitting around talking. And you don't want that. You don't want BOGSAT in your book. And I thought I was being clever and talking about justice and give and take and conflict and stakes. And she's like, no, these people are just talking about process. And so it all went. And she was right. Right.
If it were a play, that would be one thing, right? That would be perfect.
That would be 12 Angry Men.
12 Angry Men. Yeah, exactly. But in right, as exposition within, a thriller, readers have certain expectations. So yeah, and that's kind of difficult to achieve sometime. And so along your writing journey, I mean, so you've made this decision, like, I am going to have multiple careers and I'm going to excel at all. I'm going to give them all my all. But in addition to that, you have become very active and involved in the periphery of writing, right? Podcasts and being part of organizations and things like that. How important has that been to your career, establishing yourselves within the network community of writers?
Well, thank you. Well, look at you. I mean, you're the
I'm trying.
the poster child for this, of course. I mean, we Sisters in Crime, that I was national president of for 1 year, had a new motto when I started, which was, you write alone, but you're not alone. And
that's fantastic. Yeah.
I really think that's so important, because, you and I can talk about, oh my God, we have to cut 20,000 words, or should it be said or admits, or we can talk about how to kill someone. And we're truly interested in what the other person thinks about that. That is a rarefied group of people. So of course I want to be around people who think the same way I do and care about things the same way I do. And then, though, what's equally important, if not more important, is the readers connecting with the people who are going to read our stories, because we work on these stories for a year or longer by our little selves in our little study. And then at some point we're like, here is the book.
Yep.
I hope you like it. And that's really scary. And so to connect those communities, to connect, with the back room, with first chapter fun, with a mighty blaze, all those kinds of things, to connect readers and writers has been the joy of my life. I mean, absolutely. And it's so terrible and crazy because the pandemic has been such a beyond disaster in every way, except I mean, look, you and I are talking on the Zoom thing, which 4 years ago we would not have even considered doing. So the technology and the difficulties, and then the necessity of discoverability and the necessity of keeping our community together has really blossomed now. And I think I know people and have talked to people, authors and readers who I never would have met. And now I feel
totally.
as if I know them. I mean, now that I'm on book tour now in real life, which is fabulous and terrifying. I see people in real life and I think, oh, hi, so nice to see you again. And then I realize, no, I've only seen you in a little black box.
Right.
But it feels like I know them. So.
Right. Or it might be a name that you kind of vaguely recognize from Facebook because they follow you on Facebook, but you're like, oh yeah, I know your username. I had no idea what you look like.
Exactly. And we are all in this together. I mean, we're so in this together in every way, and we each rely on each other. So I'm really honored to be able to be part of the network of readers and writers who are introducing each other to new books and new authors, and to re-meet favorite authors and find out about new books. I love that. It's
totally. And I think there's a lot of it that is kind of necessary if you're going to be, if you have dreams of becoming a ongoing published writer. I mean, sure, there are stories where somebody's mega bestseller and they're a hermit. Fine, whatever. That's rare. What's more common is like, hey, let's join this network to learn from each other. And, because part of the reason I started this podcast was to get to know other writers better. And now, hey, I know you and I can share things with you. That begets things down the road that you would never have envisioned or experienced if you just don't join those communities. But it's work and it's expensive to go to conferences and things like that. So it's hard to kind of judge, how much to do. And as you know, with podcasts, it's expensive to produce these things, but
it's so much work. You do so much work with research and promotion and technical stuff, and actually doing the events. It takes so much adrenaline and so much organization and so much devotion and dedication, because you wouldn't have to do it, but you do it out of love. You absolutely do it out of love.
You do. And like what you guys do, especially with like first chapter fun, like you read the books, you really commit. The great thing about making it up is part of the whole premise of it is that I'm going into this conversation, and sure, maybe I know you ahead of time, but generally speaking, I'm going to pretend I just met you at a cocktail party and you're interesting and I want to find out everything about you. So I want to hear about your origin story. So that doesn't mean I have to sit down and read everybody's backlist before that happens, because I'm more interested in the person than necessarily the book itself. But maybe I'm just lazy.
But your bookshelves, you read all the time. I mean,
I read a lot less than I used to. I don't know if you found that since becoming a writer, but I find it hard to read in my genre, and I find it hard to just find the time, because I usually just read in bed at night, and man, I might last 2 pages and my eyes are closed, so it's a start.
That's when I read too. It's interesting because working on First Chapter Fun and on A Mighty Blaze, Crime Time, I really am reading those books.
Yeah, I know.
For First Chapter Fun, I am the world's expert now on first chapters. I really know what makes a good chapter. It's pretty interesting. But the problem with reading, for me, reading in our genre, is that I cannot just read it. So I'm reading it and thinking, oh, I wouldn't have done that. I'm not sure.
Or why didn't I think of that?
Oh, well, that's the other one.
Yeah.
Either I wouldn't have done that, or, oh my golly, why didn't I think of that? This book is too good and I'm never writing again because I'll never be as good as this book. So there are all those kinds of things going on in the back of my mind. And when I find a book, and I wonder if you think this, when I find a book where I don't think any of that, then I know it's really, when I just am immersed in the story and the walls fade away, then I know it's really a good book, because I've stopped reading like a writer and started reading like a reader. And that's so important. That's
got to be almost more like literary fiction for me, to get into that space, because if it is almost any genre fiction, there'll at least be parts where I stop myself and I'll be like, their dialogue's not super believable.
Why don't you just call the police?
Right. Too stupid to live. I know, but it does inform kind of your own decisions sometimes. And that's the other risk, right? Is like sometimes, like, I mean, I've read books before, but like, I have to put this down because I'm going to start absorbing this voice, because I'm so interested and engaged with this character that this person's written that I don't want to, start leeching it into my own writing. So that's a risk as well. And so The House Guest just came out, and, it's, people listening to this will be like, oh, it's probably, book number 14 or whatever it is. Like, I'm sure it's just old hat. It's not, though, right?
Oh, there's no old hat. Listen to this. The House Guest went into a second printing after 6 days.
Oh, so that's great.
I mean, that is floating. I am still floating as a result.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really happy about that.
As you should be.
It's every book is completely new. Every launch is completely new. Every reception is completely new. Mm-hmm. When the box of books arrive, when I look at that cover, I mean, that cover is incredible, and I'm really proud of it. The Hank DNA, I guess, is a cat and mouse thriller, but which character is the cat and which character is the mouse? So people have called The House Guest Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise.
Oh, that's great.
Right. Yeah. And that is what it is, kind of. So, because it may be the author who's gaslighting you, is what I always say.
And that's not always easy to pull off, right? Because somebody can get to the end of the story and feel really cheated if it was kind of really pulled out from underneath them in a cheap and easy way, right? So there's got to be that satisfaction. And it's hard when you write thrillers, because sometimes you're like, I'm not worried about you being satisfied. I don't need to give you a happy ending. This is my ending, but you have to get that input and feel that.
Because you and I don't plot, there's going to be a point in writing a thriller where, about 7/8 of the way through, you think, I got to figure out who actually did this.
Right.
Or what exactly happened here. And there's sometimes that I have worried that I have set up a problem that I can't solve, that I've created a mystery that I can't solve. And I sort of writhe on the couch for a day or two, longer than that sometimes, thinking, how am I going to, maybe I've created a problem that I can't solve. And when I figured out the end of The House Guest, I was sitting right here at this desk by myself, and I figured out the ending, and I stood up and applauded. I'm like, yeah, you got this. And then I thought, sit down, Hank, you're by yourself. Nobody's hearing you.
Right.
But there's that.
Yeah. That moment. Right. But the thing is, like, again, for aspiring writers, just because you figured out the ending doesn't mean it's right. So you have to, like, not only you have to figure out the ending, it can't feel like forced. It's got to be, so that's when you're kind of hoping as a pantser that your subconsciousness has been working the whole time. And that just because you haven't seen the ending yet, it's coming, and you'll because it's easy to figure out a crappy ending, but it's got to be something that's not
Doonesbury. Something like Doonesbury was writing a book, and I forget what it was, but in the end he was so tired of it that he says, it's just everybody blows up and everybody dies. And There have been times when I say to myself, just boom, everybody blows up and everybody dies. But I do think, and very importantly for people who are writing, the clues are all there. Your subconscious has put them there. You don't know what they are until you get to this point of the wave where you're at the end and you feel what really happened. And when I go back, and I bet this happens to you too, Carter, when you go back and you read the book knowing the ending, you see why things were there and why people did things, and how the antagonist, the bad guy, was there the whole time, lurking and just being bad as bad, and you just didn't notice it, and that makes a really good story. I mean, I remember I remember reading when I was like 12, Murder on the Orient Express.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, remember perfect example.
Right. Perfect example of you think, oh my golly, I never saw that coming, but it totally makes sense. And that's that goosebumpy feeling that I want my readers to get. And I bet you do too. Like, wow.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I try not to, because I have no background in writing, I really try not to overthink the process of writing. And that might sound a little precious, but the reality of it is if I sit there thinking like, okay, what's this character's arc and when is it going to happen? And, what act are we in? And, the hero's journey, like if I overthink any of that stuff, it just doesn't, like, oh, I don't know. Like I'm worried about what happens next. And then what does this person do?
I'm completely with you. I completely agree with you. I have, in a lot of interviews, I have people say, how do you decide when this happens? Or why did you decide to do X, Y, and Z, point of view or reveal a clue or talk about a curiosity point or whatever. And I think, I don't really think about it that way. I'm so sorry. I have no wisdom for you.
Yeah.
I'm just telling a good story. A good story is someone who wants something and they decide to go after it, and there are obstacles in their way and they're passionate about getting it. And what they decide to do when they hit an obstacle reveals their personality. And, then you find out what happens in the end. It's a story.
But I think that answer does have wisdom in it, right? Because it lets aspiring writers know that you don't have to have all the answers, and you can just go with your gut, and you don't have to have an MFA to write a book. So, I mean, I think that's important. But so we're going to cut off pretty soon. But before we do, we're going to do a little storytelling of our own. This is the fun part of it. I think you're going to be great at this.
I think I'm terrified.
Okay, well, that's the fear. So this is like right before you go on set. Yeah. I've chosen 3 books from my bookshelf, and you're going to choose one of them, and we're going to choose a random page, and I'll choose a sentence, and I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence, and maybe a 2 to 3 minute short story. I'll read it. You give me a couple sentences. I'll do a couple sentences, real loosey-goosey, however we want to do it. But I've got Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, my signed edition I'm very proud of. The Last List of Miss Judith Kratt by Andrea Babadis, and Dean Koontz's Kill Me Instead. Oh, no, The Good Guy. The note says Kill Me Instead. So pick one of those.
Oh, my golly. Well, I'm too familiar with Gone Girl, although it would be, and I'm terrified of taking something that she wrote and making it into something different. Let's take Dean Koontz.
Okay, so give me a page number between 1 and 400.
49.
And I am just going to quickly scan the page. We used to choose a sentence at random, and that tends not to work very well.
I thought it always worked. I love your show, and I love watching other people do this.
All right, I'm going to read a very basic piece of dialogue, okay. Just one sentence. Somebody is saying, "Want to tell me what this is all about?"
She stopped, eyeing him up and down, period. "Why don't you tell me?" she said. "It's about time."
He didn't know if the truth would work here or not. It was a huge risk either way. If he did tell her the truth, that would be the end of things. If he lied, he doesn't know what she might do.
She saw his tell, the way he tucked his hair behind his ear, the way he scratched his knee, the way he couldn't meet her eyes. He was trying to decide whether to lie or tell the truth. And how would she know? How would she know? ? She always knew. "Just tell me," she said. "We're here now, and whether I leave is not up for grabs. Whether you leave is."
The thing is, he said, the truth is much worse than whatever it is you're imagining. And so I need to know if you want to really know the truth, because it's going to change your life forever.
She looked at the door, locked. She looked at the windows, locked. Suddenly, the dark curtains that he had pulled across one of the what do you call those things? One of the window panes seemed darker than it had before. She'd thought he was bluffing, but maybe he wasn't. "Tell me," she said, crossing her fingers behind her back.
"It's not so much about telling as it is showing," he said. Go into the bathroom and look inside. Once you do, you'll never be able to unsee it.
She walked toward the bathroom door, wondering if her last moments would be of regret or joy, period. There were only two possible things that might be in the bathroom, period. She put her hand on the doorknob, period. It was quartz, glass, one of those old-fashioned faceted doorknobs that felt cool under her fingers, even though she was terrified.
She started to turn the knob, closed her eyes, took a deep breath, deciding if this is really what she wanted to do. And it was with that deep breath that she first smelled it. What was inside?
It smelled like roses and lilacs. It smelled like love and happiness. It smelled like lemon and citron and a summer's day as she opened the door and found a bathtub full of red roses stacked to the ceiling, their fragrance glorious and their red petals luscious and velvety. And there in the kitchen, in the sink, in the white porcelain sink, in the middle where the drain should be, is a bright robin's egg blue box.
We're going to call it there. That was great. Boy, did you change it up at the end? That was fantastic.
I thought we might as well go happy with this.
I'm like, oh my God, there's at least one body in there. It's probably been partially dissolved with acid.
No, I'm going with rose petals and happiness. Might as well. I mean, the stories that you all tell all turn out to be this horrific, terrible, disastrous endings. And I just thought, I'm not doing that.
Well, of course, inside the box would have been a ring, but the ring would have been on a severed finger.
Chapter two.
Exactly. Hank, I'm so glad I got a chance to kind of just sit down and pick your brain and learn from you and have this engaging and wonderful conversation. It's been fantastic.
Well, for me too, I am a huge fan and I'm in awe of this show. I'm really honored to be here. And it almost feels like we're together in real life.
It does. I really enjoyed talking to you. And of course, congrats on the latest and all the upcoming. It's just been great to continue to watch your career. And I can't wait to hang out with you in person again soon.
I agree. Thank you.
Take care, Hank. Bye.
So that's it. That's my conversation with Hank Phillippi Ryan. And I should mention you should check out her latest. She has 14 books out, but her latest is The House Guest, which she mentioned has already gone into a second printing 6 days after release, which is amazing. That's just awesome. So to have that kind of success. And if you want to find out more about her, and I suggest you do, just go over to her website, which is hankphillippiryan.com. And if you want to find out more about me, subscribe to my newsletter, buy my books, whatever. Stalk me. You can stalk me. I don't give a shit. Just go to my website, carterwilson.com. So another great episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm sure you did. More episodes of Making It Up coming out very soon. In the meantime, thanks as always for watching and or listening. Take care.